It's the Kink Consultant Podcast, where we're turning up the heat on all things kink and dating, relationships, and pop culture. So close the door, plug in your headphones, and let's get down to it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kink Consultant. I am joined by a very special guest who I'm excited to interview because we are sort of in the same field. Please welcome CJ from No Shame with CJ. CJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amanda.
I am really excited to have you on. You are my first fellow sex and relationship coach, and you are a kink and non-monogamy coach.
Yes, I like to do all the naughty things.
I do love it, especially because I think we talked about this, and I think a lot of the people who follow me know I am monogamous or trying to end up in a monogamous relationship. So non-monogamy is a little bit of a mystery to me at times.
Well, we are going to uncover some of the mysteries and perhaps make it less mysterious or uncomfortable.
Yes. And I'm really excited about it because I have many clients who are interested in learning more about kink, exploring, introducing, and maintaining it. And then when they are polyamorous or when they want to explore any type of non-monogamy, I will help them because I am the kink consultant, but I will often encourage them to seek out someone who specializes in polyamory because I think that it deserves someone who fully, deeply understands it. Some of the work we do, I feel, is so intimate that it adds something more when we can really relate and truly say, yes, I have been in your shoes, because it's not always possible to say that either.
It's funny because today I was like, ooh, like I'm a little bit triggered by ENM, which stands for ethical non-monogamy, because it feels judgy to me because your non-monogamy is ethical. By whose standard? I think that one of the beautiful things that I've learned on my kink and relationship journey and just getting older and exploring my desires is that I get to define things in the way that I want to and what works for me. And it's always important when interacting with other people what the definition means, because we could say ENM, we could say poly community, whatever, we could say kink community, but it's like, well, specifically, what does that mean to you? So ENM stands for ethical non-monogamy, and that is a way for people to practice having multiple partners, right? And the point about being ethical is that everyone is aware of it, right? My preference is to say consensual non-monogamy because I do think that that's a little bit different. But I also want to say sometimes it's valid. And I didn't used to believe this. I would get very much I wanted to know if this person's partner knew what they were doing and blah, blah, blah. And it got to a point where it was like, you know what? Sometimes it's none of my business because you cannot know someone's entire relationship history and the reasons why they might be going outside of their partnership or marriage. And maybe that's not ethical to me or to you or to others. And it's not 100% consensual because both people don't know, but we're also saying something about something that we don't necessarily know the full story. See what I'm saying?
I am really aligned with that too.
Sometimes consent isn't possible or wanted because of valid relationship styles. Don't ask, don't tell. So is that consensual? Is that ethical? I think that these are questions we need to interrogate our own language. And then when we're talking about polyamory, there's so many different versions. And polyamory basically is multiple loves, right? Is the capacity, the willingness, the desire, the interaction with people in a sort of romantic, loving way that may or may not include multiple partners involved in a family style or whatever, kitchen table poly where everyone meets and talks. It's a subset of non-monogamy. And again, when you're dating in this world or meeting people, it's always important to ask what it means to them and what they're looking for. So I'm just sort of kind of vague, non-monogamy, because that just suits me. And someday I might consider myself more polyamorous because I might fall in love. I don't say, no, I'm not open to that, but I'm not seeking it out. I'm in a marriage. and I'm not looking for another like romantic loving partner in the same way that I am with my husband.
That is extremely valid. Just taking it back 1 or 2 steps, interrogating our own language is super important. And I think it's something a lot of us skip over. I don't know if you run into this. I make a lot of content on social media. I find that if I put a label on anything, I get a lot of attacks about like the labeling of things. And I'm like, well, it's actually very helpful for people to find their way if they can label it.
Yeah.
You know, they can do more research.
Yes.
And I think that interrogating your own language is just another level of that that's also really important. It's not just like, well, what label am I under? It's like, what does that mean for me? What does that
For
mean
me.
to you? Yeah.
Yes, don't make assumptions. When someone says, like, "I'm kinky," like, the other person will have their own visualization or interpretation of what that is, and they need to ask you what that means when you say you're kinky.
You're speaking my language entirely because you can tell me you're kink, and I'm like, there are 1,000 things that that could mean. So you'll need to narrow it down. One of these language that popped up for me, it's one that I have a lot of confusion around, is solo
Mm.
poly. What does that mean to you?
I don't identify that way and never have, but my sense of it is that a solo poly person is they choose to be their own partner, and that's like their priority is themselves. They are their own partner. They engage with various other potential partners in a different way. They are not looking to be partnered up in sort of a traditional way.
That explains it really well. I am not poly, but that explanation makes me think in the line of interrogating language and seeing what it means for us, there are parts of that that I identify with where I'm at in my life right now.
Okay, can we talk about that? 'Cause
Yeah.
now I'm tingling and excited because, I mean, I don't know you very well, but I know a little bit of your story from social media and from talking to you. But what about this idea of, like, considering yourself when you're dating, whether you're kinky or not, or non-monogamous or not, like, having sort of a solo poly attitude?
I already just feel this need to immediately caveat it, really, and be like, as long as I'm treating everyone fair, I already feel the burden of like, it's selfish to say I'm the most important person. But at the same time, I know and I teach and I coach that it's not. But when it's me, I'm having a moment of hesitation in calling myself the most important person. And that's just
Mhm.
a moment of vulnerability and honesty of like, that's what it brought up in me in admitting that I'm
Oh,
the most important person because a feeling of selfishness or an insecurity about being labeled as selfish comes up when I admit that.
thank you for sharing that because I think that that's really important. And I think that in particular, a lot of us who are socialized as women in particular, not only for women, but we are raised in a way that silences our needs. And we are called selfish when we stand in our truth and in our needs. I would just ask you to look at like where that comes from. Was it something put on you, or is it something that you actually that comes from within? The flip side of that is when we're not behaving in our own best interests and we're not showing up for ourselves in at least an equal way that we're showing up for other people, are we actually giving them the gift of us or what we think that they want?
I know the answer for that right now. It's something that I actively work on of who am I giving them? Because it's only fair to give my most authentic self because that's the only version that it can be sustained.
Right there. Because and when we're dating, when we first meet somebody, we want to attract them. We think about what they might like, what would attract them to us, and we might put on a persona. There's something beautiful about that at the same time, not if we are masking who we are, because someday the mask will drop and the reality will show. And this is not just for us, this is for like having an awareness that people typically show up to the table, the dating to the date on their best behavior
Yeah.
and their best selves. And that's where we get into trouble because we don't actually, we're not seeing them yet and they're
Yeah.
not seeing us. Like it takes time, even if we're aware, even if we're trying to show up authentically. These things take time, and you're not going to show yourself in like a challenging situation right away. Like that takes time. And I think often we're in too much of a rush to tell ourselves the story about who they are, who we are, how we go work together. And then we're like disappointed.
Yeah, because we wanna be happy, and we seek it out. We want the fairy tale, or at least I know I do at times, and I call myself a recovering hopeless romantic because I am constantly trying to see things a little more clearly and not through those rose-tinted glasses that I enjoy putting on from time to time.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being a hopeless romantic. It's like you want to keep that romance going. Like in my partnership, we had a lot of challenges and we started off in a long distance relationship. It benefited us because we got to see each other and have distance in ways that we wouldn't have normally. I believe it was in total 8 years.
Whoa, that is way longer than I expected you to say.
We had 28 months of physical separation because of the pandemic. For us, what worked was that because we are kinky, we're in a power exchange relationship, because we like match so well on all of those things and the non monogamy part as well, it was like it made us want to like try harder because it was such a good match that it was like, okay, we have to be committed to like making this work because we're like on fire. But also like when you have that sort of chemistry, you can like crash and burn because we would have like been coming at it like very quickly physically and like having all those overwhelming feelings and like the love and the, all that like delicious oxytocin running through our bodies. And it would have like bonded us really quickly. But before we even met in person, we talked for 5 months. So we got to know each other very deeply before we actually even could play together. So that was really helpful.
I don't have the exact same situation, but there is someone that I'm seeing right now. And due to conflicting schedules and things, we'd seen each other a couple of times. So we talked for basically, I'd say, a month straight before we met each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then even then, it was few and far between and
Yeah.
allowed us to develop that connection that I don't know if it would have developed the same way if we had met in person. And how did you meet originally?
On FetLife.
Oh, that life. Well, you know what's so funny? Like in my world, I'm always like, it's not a dating site because it's not, but it is a place to find your community. And sometimes
Yeah.
your community is where you find your partner.
Yeah, like, okay, here's the benefit of it. It's potentially the place where you're not going to be shamed.
Yes.
You don't have to explain, like we're all there for some version of what is exciting to us, right? And those don't always match, but you can end up finding people that resonate with you, who understand you.
Here's where I go on a FetLife profile. I scroll down to their kinks to read through their kinks and think like, are we
100%.
aligned? Is that what you did as
Oh,
well?
yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
All about it. And it makes it a lot of fun.
So getting back to non-monogamy, there are apps for that. There are apps for people in the lifestyle. And sometimes, the kink and the lifestyle, like meaning like swingers, non-monogamous people, whatever, they kind of overlap, right? So there's a lot of places where that's occurring as well. But there are apps for those things. And the benefit of that is like, okay, you can make an assumption that most of the people there have a basic understanding of what you're talking about. Or they're just there like checking it out and cruising and trying to learn the lingo and whatever. Like sometimes they're not up to speed, but it is a place where it's like, okay, I don't have to try to explain to someone what I'm into and risk this like conversation around having to justify it,
Yeah, which
which is nice.
because there is sometimes pressure to justify it. You are non monogamous, living in the lifestyle, and you also have a nearly adult child. How open are you with your family about your lifestyle? All right, Kinkster, let's talk about pleasure. Not just mine, yours too. If you're enjoying this episode of The Kink Consultant, I need you to do me a little favor, and I promise it'll feel oh so good. Take a second and give this podcast a 5-star rating. Just imagine your finger sliding all over that 5th star, pressing down, giving it exactly the kind of attention it deserves. Yeah, That's it. And you know what happens when you do? I get all hot and bothered knowing you're out there, showing your appreciation. Plus, every time you leave a review, a naughty little brat somewhere gets that spanking they've been begging for. So be a good listener and tap that star, won't you? Thanks, love. Now let's get back to the fun.
I am more open with my family. I'm open to the degree that they ask questions. They have a little, being in the business that I am, you can kind of get a read from people and like, oh, if they want to hear about it or not. And I'm just kind of on a mission to destigmatize pleasure and expression of self, whether that's your gender identity, sexual identity, desires, whatever it is, like, and a huge sort of change for me in my life is, of course, when I started exploring power exchange and like finding out that I love this, but also I started working as a phone sex operator. Boy, it was that eye opening for me, like for men, what men are going through in terms of like having to hide parts of themselves. And in particular, many of my older clients who I know were in marriages or long term relationships, and they enjoyed things like cross dressing or being submissive and things like that. And it just brought a lot of compassion out of me for people hiding parts of themselves. Part of my like thing is like, look, I'm all for free speech. But also, when we're making a joke about STIs or someone's sexuality or kink shaming people, it's hurting someone and it's probably hurting someone close to you and you don't know. And it also erodes trust because they're not going to tell you about themselves. And I think the last thing that we need right now is to have more walls going up where we don't listen and have empathy and understanding of each other. So for me as a parent, also, it was important for me when my children were a little bit younger to start talking about pleasure and their genitals and pornography and sex, that it's normal, that these things are acceptable. And they're, when you begin to explore, you are more than welcome to talk to me. There's resources available. And then part of that, because I was single or had the appearance of being single because my partner was overseas for so many years, but I was for several years a single parent, that I wanted my kids to have an understanding that monogamy wasn't the only option and that it was okay for them not to, like, with their first exploration around dating, to get into a relationship and be monogamous. So I started talking about the fact that I was seeing other people and I went out on dates. And then when I did tell them about my partner overseas, now my husband, and I said, look, we are actually seeing other people while we're together. I think it was my youngest son said, oh, mom, you're a player, which I thought was very cute. But it's like, thank you, but not really, because a player doesn't necessarily tell that to everybody. And for me, we're open about it and we have an understanding that it's okay for us to do that because, like, I only get to see him a couple of times a year. I can have fun with other people. I can still have friends. I can still go out on dates, that sort of thing. So I've kind of have been like opening up depending on how much they ask, where they're at developmentally. And now they're both adults. But in the case of me, the reality is I'm dating my business right now. So I don't have a lot of time for actual dates. My husband has been seeing someone for over a year. She's been to our house. My son has met her. My husband has gone away for the night or for a weekend. And there's just sort of like a normalization of this is what we do. I'm not over here having drama about it. I'm very comfortable with him doing that and me having some space and just
Yeah.
not feeling like I have to one up him or something like that. It's just sort of, I think my attitude is like letting my son see how it can be beneficial to a relationship and not potential drama around it. But that's just my temperament at this stage of my life. I'm not saying it can work in every relationship or every dynamic, but for us, it really does.
When you were younger, would that not have been your inclination to be so calm?
I wouldn't say that I was like a person who had like a high feeling of jealousy. I would say that my temperament from early on was always sexually adventurous to a point of like, I enjoy pleasure, I enjoy sex, and I enjoy intimacy and playing with that and having fun and fantasizing and thinking about having a threesome or something. Like it was always sort of like, ooh, and like learning about polyamory like decades ago, I could see that being a possibility for me. I didn't have a strong drive for it. I don't feel it's like my identity, but it was sort of like more of I like to turn it all into fun because it's fucking hot. That's where I come from.
And you're on this pursuit of pleasure and
Yeah.
normalizing, and that is it. For me, the words I heard were not enough because that's something I identify with, right? And I have a lot of jealousy around it. So I think that's one of the, I don't know if I got past that, if poly or non monogamy would still be for me. Oh, I do. Anyone who's been following me for a long time knows I call myself monogamish because I look for other kinky play partners, but still want sexual monogamy at this time. That's what I'm learning to say at this time.
I love that. This is the thing. We all go through different stages of life and we have different periods of growth. And I'm not saying that you're going to grow into that space, but something might shift in you that opens up the possibility of like, I want that.
Yeah.
And you're leaving the door open because, look, I didn't know 30 years ago that I was going to enjoy the things that I enjoy. And I might have been a little bit like shocked and appalled, or I probably would have been a little bit more like, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think it's always good to just sort of have this attitude of like, I really wonder what is out there and like what I might get up to kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
someday I'm a lot older than you. I think I'm 20 years plus older than you. I'm at a different stage in life. I've had my kids. I had my first marriage. It didn't work. There was a lack of intimacy, which was a huge reason for me why I needed to get out of that. And it was a mutual thing. But I knew that that was gonna be, like, the top of the list for me was intimacy in another partnership.
I can relate to that. For me, it's kink. I jokingly say I was born kinky because I always knew I wanted kink and I always knew I was kinky. The other things, I'm growing into them. And sometimes I grow into a different direction of maybe wanting more monogamy and less openness. And it sort of
Yeah.
ebbs and flows. But I think
Mhm.
one of the things I will probably always wonder is if this had been presented to me at a younger age and I had been taught at a younger age to really handle my jealousy, which is something I dealt with. I had crazy jealousy about my sisters who I always thought were better than me in some way, right? So I actively worked on that jealousy. And I'm wondering if the options had been presented to me at a younger age, would dealing with jealousy have been something I was more prepared to do or handle?
I think we also romanticize jealousy. It's like, oh, if you don't have jealousy, then you don't really love somebody. And
True.
that's bullshit. And that's also can be like a pathway to abuse.
I
And
agree.
that I would say that there was like a real strong possessiveness in a past relationship for me that turned to abuse. And that was like a form of mental abuse. And then it started to become physical. I think that it's like this expectation that it's like, oh, that means that you truly love me. And that's just total bullshit. Undoing some of that, I think it's healthy. So,
Yeah.
envy is when you wish you had something that someone else has. And jealousy is when you fear that what you have will be taken away.
So I have my phone. Maybe you have the newer iPhone, let's just say. And
Yeah.
I envy that, your
Yes.
newer iPhone. But this phone is very important to me. And I have,
But can I have that?
no, it's all mine.
Yeah.
Like you can't. This is my life, you know?
Yes. You got
And
it.
that's
That's
jealous.
right.
Okay. I liked that. Thank you for that exercise. That was helpful.
Yeah, because we can feel both things
Yeah.
when we're in that dynamic or dating or exploring. And it's like, ooh, you can have envy for somebody or someone else's relationship or whatever, or a kink dynamic that you're witnessing. I did go through a process of that initially in my relationship with my husband because of the distance. He was like, I'm not ever going to play monogamy again. It's not for me. So, and I agreed to that. So I had to like be able to do it or say, this isn't for me. I had already been exploring it on my own and in a previous partnership, sort of. But I was like, oh, I kind of looked at it like icing on the kinky cake where I was like, I get kink and I get this too. Like, how fun is this? But then he would be like, oh, I'm going on a date. And I'm like, how old is she? Like, just like questioning, like, how old is she? Is she close to my age? Like, because I knew he wanted to have like a peer. What is she into? Like, what does she look like? All the things. And I would start to feel this like fear, discomfort, and anxiety around like, is she going to be better than me? Like, what if he falls in love with this person? What if they're a perfect match, just like we are? And like all these things. And I kind of would work myself up into a state. I had to sit with it and deal with it. I don't know how this happened, but it was almost like a flip of a switch. I was like, I can't control that. And I don't want to control it because he gets to love whoever he loves. And if he chooses to love somebody else, that's never anything I'm going to be able to control, whether it is in a monogamous relationship or not. Like, it's the fallacy of control, is what I think our relationships are. The fallacy of like, I'm going to have this relationship forever. We don't know that. We just don't know. Period. End of story. I don't care what relationship style you're in or what you do, what age you are. We don't have the control. We can try to aspire to that, but what can you control? Yourself, your feelings, and what you are contributing to the relationship. So if I'm going to like be spinning out of control and needing him to like fill my cup with accolades and reassurance and all of these things, like that's not fun. We need to lift each other up. But if it's always his job to be filling my cup, he's not going to want to be around for very long. So I started like filling my own cup and being like, I'm really good at this. I'm really good. Like, I know how to please him. I know what gets him off. I know the things that he's attracted to in me. And I just got better at them. I was like, that's what I control.
How do you honor your own fears? Because fear is valid as well. So, how do you balance the honoring it and recognizing it with working through it and learning to fill your own cup?
You can't just shove it down. And it's just not a fun place to be for yourself. Like, creating a lot of anxiety in your life for something that might happen. If I felt lack from him, if he wasn't filling my cup in the ways that I need, as well as me doing it, I might not feel the same way. I'm not saying ignore the fear, but sometimes you just have to live with a little bit of discomfort, do things anyway. Like, that's when good things happen, is we don't know. And sometimes we're uncomfortable with the unknown or something that we're not necessarily good at yet, like newbie king, or trying something new. Like, you want to be the expert, but you're not because you're just getting started and you don't even know if you like it. It's just like taking it step by step, really just saying, yeah, I see you. And you know what? You can go in the other room for now and I'll come check on you later because right now I'm going to go have some fun.
And
Just putting the fear in the other room and being like, I'll tend to you later, but right now I'm going to go have some fun.
I wish I had met you a year ago. Right? Because I think that like I could have had some really beneficial conversations. I think one of the things that I'm also recognizing that an important piece of this puzzle is you weren't don't ask, don't tell with each other. You were tell each other. And with that comes a certain level of things to work through. While it might be the unknown, it's a known unknown.
And like sometimes I'm like, I don't want to know that
Mm.
part. Initially, I had more of that. Now I'm like, I want. And this goes between the three of us too. Like, it's part of our eroticism. We're enjoying that. And there's something about like, ooh, like the exchange. It's
Yeah.
hot, it's sexy. We also have boundaries when it's like if a partner were like, I don't really want them to know anything, we're good with that. Like we don't have to share everything. But for us, it's like it feeds our relationship and it feeds our
I'm assuming this is something you worked through together over time. You figured out what worked for you,
yeah,
navigated it that way. Because I'm guessing, based on my own even monogamous relationships, you can't figure it all out in the moment. There's no map you put together and you're like, this is the map. This is how we're doing it.
exactly. And it takes the constant negotiation and reflection. Also, things that I was like, well, I'm not into that. And then like I'm totally, it's like it's just part of the journey.
I relate to that so much. The thing that I thought I never wanted becomes exactly what I'm living for and really relishing in, thriving in even. Speaking of this, like what you are at one stage of your life might change. I think I might get this weekly because I do my Monday Ask Me Anything on Instagram. Inevitably, I'm going to get a question of what if one partner wants to be open and the other does not? I think it's something that needs to be talked about, but what's your advice on that?
Keep open the communication. A lot of times, what happens is someone will start to learn something and they start like reading the books and listening to the podcasts and
Yeah.
following all the experts and like getting like really excited about it. And then they have all this knowledge and like personal knowledge about what they think might work for them and that they want to do this thing. And they're like a million steps ahead before they say anything. I think one issue, which it's fine to like want to do that, but then you have to be like, wait a second. There I haven't broached this conversation. They are where I was in the beginning. They don't know about this. How do I how do I come back to their level and invite them in? It needs to be an invitation and an inclusion and sort of like I'm really wanting deeper connection with you kind of thing. And I want to share something scary and vulnerable for me. Like admit the things that you don't want to happen and the things that you do want to happen and like invite them in and then start over with listening to the podcast together if they're open to it. Talk about yourself, not about what it's going to do for the relationship. Talk about yourself only and what you think might benefit you and how you might show up differently in the relationship and what your intentions are with it. Just start slow. Like, don't turn it into like a huge conversation, like little bits first, and just plant the seed slowly, gently, inviting them. Like, a lot of it is just going to be your approach. If they're like a hard no, that doesn't mean that you shut down because this may be a valid thing for you. It might be a need. And it's like, look, I am a human being. I am allowed to grow and to change and to expand. And this is what is becoming important for me. I would like to continue to have a conversation around what this might look like in a way that would work for both of us. I want to keep having the conversation. And it's not going to come to a solution right away, but there are people who are in mono, poly, or non mono relationships. One person is more monogamous and the other person isn't. Some relationships are complex, right? There's all sorts of ways that these things can work, and you need to get creative. And just because other people don't do it doesn't mean it can't be done. And like, you don't know. People do things in private that you don't know about.
Yeah, thank you for breaking it down. I think sometimes we forget, and this happens with kink too. The advice is very similar to what I say about just pure kink. One person goes so far down the path of hyperfixating on what applies to them that they forget the side of you're in a relationship with someone. How are you going to introduce and maintain it long term with each other? It's not just about one person's needs being met. To have your needs met, very valid, but you're not in the relationship alone.
Okay, so this is where I think kink and non-monogamy really go well together is in potentially like one person is like finally admits or has grown into like, I'm into this thing. And the other person is like, hell no, I'm
Yeah.
not into that thing. I do not want any part of it. What are you going to do? Here comes non monogamy, people. It's like, get fucking creative here. And it doesn't mean sex always. It
No.
can for some people, it does. For me, it definitely does. But it's like maybe you can just get that a power exchange or whatever, like submissiveness or in some way, getting a spanking. And
Yes.
it's nothing else. Like go to a spanking party and that's all that you're getting. It's like, yay, I got some impact. I'm good.
And that is why I've called myself monogamish. Going full circle to what words mean for you,
Yeah.
monogamish, I will play with other people, but for me, sexual monogamy is what I crave. And that's where I am in my own journey. So when you have clients come to you, is
Uh-huh.
this what they're mostly coming to talk about?
Most of my clients are midlife women, and in particular, women who are like looking to expand their own sort of sexuality or eroticism, or their divorce, because this is my story. My story is one of divorce and sexual and non monogamy exploration post divorce, right? So, most of the people I work with are women. I'm starting to possibly open it up to couples with
Mm,
this caveat. I am really hardcore about your own personal needs. The relationship almost is secondary to me. Yes, I want people to get really good at communicating, and sometimes they need a third person to help them. But I don't like the dynamic of me and a couple together, like on screen in a coaching session, like having them separated because I want them to be themselves.
yes.
And sometimes there's a lot of patterns and a lot of dynamics that are subtle or not so subtle. And when people are sitting together, they hold back. What I'm all about is like, we're stripping that away. Sometimes there's just a lot of pain and a lot of history there that's hard to be able to talk about yourself. I have worked with couples in the past where I've like worked with them completely separately and there was like a very strong wall there where I don't share information.
It's like, what do you
Yeah.
want and why aren't you doing it?
But I do think most of us don't even know what we want because you mentioned this earlier, selfishness and feeling like focusing in on yourself and your own desires and your own needs is selfish. That's a story that has been put on us by society, by people who want us to give more. And
Yeah.
like, do they want to extract things from us? And when we're like, no, it's not selfish. It's so that I can live a joyful, pleasurable life that's meaningful to me. And then I will attract the people in my life who are on that journey with me.
What does that feed in you?
It's probably a little bit of ego where it's like, it feels like a gift because, as I said earlier, I feel like society is like trying to contain us. I don't want other people to feel like they can't be themselves or to try something new because of this container that someone else constructed.
A ton of sense. I mean, and it's hard, at least for me personally, to figure out what society has put on me, what I've put on myself, and what family has put on me. And I think it's what you're describing too. Maybe people don't know what they want all the time.
And a lot of this is just about permission. And the place where you can really start is by giving yourself permission to dream.
What does that look like? How do you give yourself permission?
Well, I mean, it probably actually started when I was a young person and I moved to New York City. Yeah. I became someone else. And that was like getting away from my family. And I wouldn't say that my family was like super controlling or anything, but I was the oldest. I was the first grandchild. And I had that good girl like I love being a good girl, still do.
You are a good girl, I can
But
tell.
now I like it in a different way, right? And sometimes I don't want to be the good girl if it doesn't work.
You want to be the good girl when you want to be the good girl.
Yes. And when I get recognition for it. I think that that's when it started. So I think that there was some sort of like separation from like expectations or perceived expectation from family and from the place where I grew up, I was like, well, now I'm going to be a weirdo. I just kind of became that. It was confirmed to me constantly. I think that was just my personal drive and not like letting anyone say, you can't do that.
I think it's a very powerful thing to be able to be called weird or looked at as different and continue on that path of being your
Yeah,
authentic self.
stay in your lane.
I will very quickly get back in my lane because I jokingly say I've been called weird all my life, but because I have, to a certain extent, I continued marching to the beat of my own drum, but in ways that I felt safe for me to do that. I think it's a very powerful thing when you are able to stay the course and continue expressing yourself freely. That's tough.
And you find your people and you find the environment where that is appreciated. That's probably how I found what I discovered about myself was through that. Like, I will go outside the box. And it's like, look, if you're not going to see me and appreciate me for who I am, go on somewhere else.
Okay. And how has that translated to your current relationship right now?
Oh, well, I felt seen because when I was early on in FetLife, I'm not a particularly submissive person. I wasn't looking for someone to tame me or to control me or anything like that. I was like the types of DOMs that I was having interactions with. I like that flavor. I found that there was some weaponization of terminology, like, you're not a true submissive.
Ooh.
My husband doesn't walk through the world being all alpha Donny. Like, he's definitely not that type of person. So I get to see like these different, and it's kind of like this dance. Like, it's not all 24/7 Dom sub. And we used to think we might want that. There's still the possibility that in the future we might have that. It doesn't work where you have another person living with you who's not consenting to being around that. It can be under the radar, but it's also very hard to be a solopreneur and all the things like life gets in the way of DS. That's kind of where we are currently
As you said earlier, you are dating your business.
dating my business.
I feel sometimes like I'm in an avoidant relationship with my own business because I'm like, "Oh, this is scary and rough and could fail." So, but
You're not in an avoidant relationship with your business. Like, you're showing up, like, you're kicking ass.
took you down this path.
Oh, just, I mean, being an older woman who left a career to raise her kids and ended up divorced and financially was fine post-divorce, and I really still wanted to be there for my kids during the times when I had them. It was important to me. So, I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be in my 40s to go back to my old work. So, I had to reinvent myself a couple of times. I did coaching certification.
Coaching is different.
You're providing the service and someone is paying for it, right?
Yeah.
But it gives you insight into, like I was saying before, just the hidden shadow side of people that other people don't get to see. And it felt like an honor to me. I have a lot of feelings about it. And just like, oh my God, like, what an honor that someone exposed themselves to me in this way. And I want to hold it like very carefully. That's what brings me to coaching. It's like, look, you can tell me your darkest craving, need, kinky desire, and I'm not going to be like, oh, like, don't you think there's something wrong with you? Like, and that's what people do. They pathologize kink. And I also find it very frustrating that sort of content or language, anything about sexuality and pleasure, not even talking about kink, gets thrown in this bucket of like some big scary thing that's going to lead to bad things happening. Actually, I think is so very dangerous because they want us to live in the shadows. They want us to be censored. They want us to not have the power that lays the groundwork for the bad things happening. King shouldn't be so far underground because that's when the bad things can happen. Like, all these things in your work and my work and so many good people's work, so many educators out there, we're trying to be like, negotiations are kind of like, actually, y'all should be taking lessons from us because you're not doing the things that you need to be doing.
I don't even expect people to know all the things that they're supposed to be doing. You're not going to inherently know, I think is my point. It's about the research and talking to people. When I heard your business name, No Shame with CJ, I was like, does what it says on the tin. That's what we're looking for. Like,
Yeah.
great name. I love getting to talk to people and realize they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. And you are living your life in that way.
Thank you.
The authenticity makes it everything. So, if somebody wanted to book a session with you, where can I find you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram. It's No Shame with CJ on Instagram. I have a link tree there and I have a couple of free resources. Currently, I am pushing sort of like getting to know yourself while dating and like avoiding the pitfalls of like falling in love too fast and all of those sorts of things. So I have a free resource called a feelings tracker. So every time you go on a date, you print one of these out and you use it as a debrief for yourself. When you come back, it's like a gut check and just sort of a reminder of like how you can stay like present and not get carried away. So I'm primarily on Instagram. I also have a website, noshamewithcj.com. On both of those, you can email me or send me a message or book a free consultation call, see if we could work together in some capacity.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I really could talk to you all night, but I will have you on again because I know that we only scraped the surface of the things we wanted to talk about today.
Yes, awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, CJ.
Thanks, Amanda.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out. Email info@thekinkconsultant.com. Until next time, keep on kinking on.